Hey guys, before we start today's episode, I'd like to say that this isn't part of the regular Retroversy series. Retroversy was a thing that I started because I wanted to be able to look back on games that came out a while ago that I never got the chance to play, and see if they still hold up well to this day. Like for instance Shadow of the Colossus, or Final Fantasy VII, or maybe even Earthbound. This is not that. This is something I've decided to call Thoughtroversy, since it's basically about topics I've been thinking about for a while. And I kinda wanted to talk about them here on YouTube. The topic I had in mind this time was about Dark Souls and Monster Hunter, and whether or not they're similar. I know it sounds silly, but it's actually kinda weird to see how polarizing this topic seems to be between fans of both series. Some claim they're very similar, and if you like one, you will definitely like the other. Others hold a firm stance that they're not similar at all, and to suggest so would be completely wrong in any way, shape, or form. So where do I stand? Well, I'm not entirely sure. On one hand, I think they're incredibly different, but at the same time, they're incredibly similar as well. And we're gonna dig into why I think that is in a little while. Hell, even the Monster Hunter subreddit pretended to be a Dark Souls subreddit for April Fools of 2016, so there must be something that makes them alike. To start off, let me introduce the games on their own merits before I begin the comparisons. Dark Souls probably needs no introduction by now, but here's one anyway. You are an undead who is cursed to live again every time you die. You wander the lands of Lordran, or Drangleic, or Lothric, depending on which of the Dark Souls games you play, cutting down enemies, taking down huge bosses, and piecing together convoluted, but ultimately really deep and engaging lore. It's a bleak game with a crushing atmosphere and an almost nihilistic story, with a brutal difficulty that almost never feels unfair. Every enemy follows the same rules, and by being careful, you should be able to learn their movesets, anticipate attacks, and get out of the way. It's an action role-playing game, something along the lines of Zelda, but without the temple puzzle structure and much more focus on challenge. Plus, there's a leveling system. Every enemy is dangerous, and the same goes for the world. It's full of traps, dangerous heights, poisonous swampland, and more dramatic shit like that. On the other hand, Monster Hunter is almost the polar opposite when it comes to atmosphere, story, and level design. So, what is Monster Hunter about? Well, I'm glad you asked. You play as Gandalf the Red Mage while you defend Ash Ketchum in court for having murdered his trusty pet Digimon, Sonic the Enchilada. You hunt monsters! It isn't rocket science, it's in the fucking title! Well, that's pretty much all there is to it as well. Pick a quest or a target, go out there and kill it. After that, you carve it and make weapons and armor out of its parts. No, get your mind out of the gutter, not those kinds of parts. Anyway, it's a lighthearted and almost plays as a parody of itself, with silly gestures and so on. For example, every potion you chug has you posing like a fucking Power Ranger after each swig, and everything is incredibly exaggerated, from the body languages to the size of the weapons. The rest of the game has been dialed up to 11 when it comes to the monsters too. You got your standard wyvern-looking enemies like the Rathalos and the Rathian, but then you'd factor in other bastards like the mighty Cedius, or the fucking pickle itself, the Deviljho. And everything about the Deviljho is so monumentally stupid and childish, it's seriously nothing but a joy to fight. It looks like a pickled T-Rex that was drawn by a 4-year-old.
This one is a T-Rex dinosaur with its head covered in teeth. It also has a laser breath, and its eyes glow red when he is mad.
How can these two games ever be compared? They're thematically the polar opposites. I think this has more to do with how the games are played. Like, combat-wise, they do feel much more open for comparison. In both games, there are a lot of different weapon types, and all of them feel very different to use. If you use an Ultra Greatsword in Dark Souls, it feels very different from using an S-Talk. Likewise, if you use a Greatsword in Monster Hunter, you're going to be very much out of your element if you're used to using a weapon like, I don't know, the Switch Axe. And even then, the Switch Axe has a Greatsword mode built into it, but it still feels different. Very different. You're also incredibly committed to each swing you do in both games. In games like Zelda, your swings don't really feel like they matter too much. Just mash the button and you basically win. Not in Monster Hunter, or Dark Souls for that matter. Both are very deliberate games. If you swing and you miss, you could very well die. Hell, even if you hit, you could die because you got greedy and attacked instead of dodging. It's almost like doing a Pokemon Nuzlocke challenge. Every single move matters, and if you get greedy, you will get punished. And in these regards, the games may feel similar to some, but not to all. I think it all comes down to the reasons you play the various games. When it comes to Monster Hunter, I can think of 2 reasons to play. First, the multiplayer. If you like playing games for the social aspect, you will have a blast with Monster Hunter. The online is excellent, and playing with friends is one of the funnest things I've done in a long time. There is little to no lag at all, and the experience is overall buttery smooth. The other reason I can think you would play Monster Hunter is the challenge. It can be fucking brutal. Fighting a big monster means you're almost never safe. Unless you're fighting the Great Jaggy. Yeah, he's pretty much the Krillin of the Monster Hunter universe. Great Jaggy? Pfft, more like well done Jaggy, cause you're toast! Whoa! Other than that fail cake though, monsters you've beaten plenty of times can still kick your ass if you let your guard down. If you want to get the most mileage out of the game, play it for both reasons. Get some friends together and get your asses handed to you together. It's so much fun, and the feeling I got when I beat my first monster was amazing. On the other hand, there are many reasons to play Dark Souls. Challenge is certainly one of them. I mean, their friggin' tagline is prepare to die. Every enemy is deadly, and you gotta be on the defensive your entire time playing. Bosses can kill you fast as fuck, and traps are everywhere. I already said this, didn't I? Well, shit. Anyway, the other reasons you could ostensibly play Dark Souls is, for instance, the fantastic lore it builds, or the excellent exploration of the world, and neither of these are present in Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter has a linear story that honestly is pretty boring. Go out and kill a monster and rinse and repeat. Sometimes people say, hey, good job. Other times they're like, but another monster is out to get us. But all you do is kill monsters. It's admittedly really fun to kill monsters, but that's still pretty much all you do. Dark Souls has a deep lore that you gotta play detective to piece together, and it gets really engaging and nothing is laid out for you. The level designs in Dark Souls are organic and interconnected, woven together like a nice basket of fruit. Moldy, diseased fruit that is full of deadly traps! If you explore in Dark Souls, you'll find illusory walls that can lead you to chests, items, armor, amazing gear, and more amazing experiences. Combing the world is really interesting, but the more you explore, the more you're exposed to death around every corner. In Monster Hunter, the areas are segmented with loading screens, and the areas aren't really interesting themselves. And there are very little things to actually find, except maybe a rock with materials here, or maybe a hidden shortcut there. In the end, most of the similarities come down to combat and how that's handled. You have different armor builds that change how you play pretty drastically, albeit slightly different in both franchises. In Monster Hunter, you craft weapons and armor out of enemies, and in addition to defense, you also get skills or abilities from these armors. In Dark Souls, you find the armor, or you buy it, and the heavier it is, the slower you roll. It's different, but the main takeaway is that min-maxers will find a lot of joy out of both systems, and they both change your playstyle quite drastically depending on the build. The biggest similarities are in the weapons though. As I mentioned earlier, different weapons almost feel like playing a different game in both cases. And you're so committed to your swings in both games, you might as well marry them. I mean, take a look at this swing here and how long it takes for me to recover. Some other comparisons you can make are that both games have a stamina meter that dictates more or less all you do in the game. You also need to be careful when to heal because of the animation. Timing is also important, and preparation is key. And besides, if you fail, you can always try again with a different approach. Maybe try out a different armor, maybe choose something with better resistances depending on what monster or boss you're going to fight. Another incredibly interesting thing is that while you will learn the level design like the back of your own hand in Dark Souls because of how it's laid out and how you have to visit each area plenty of times and how careful you have to be, the same thing actually applies to Monster Hunter as well, even if there is nothing to write home about when it comes to the actual level design. Instead, each area can become an arena that you fight a monster in, since they usually roam around. And that means you will have to learn where all the ledges are, which routes are the most effective, and so on. It's actually really interesting. In the end, there are different reasons people will play different games. I personally enjoy all parts of these games, but the main draw for me may be the challenge. And you'll find plenty of that here, in both games. Memorizing boss patterns feel very similar between the games, because bosses, or monsters, telegraph their attacks, and you need to either dodge your way out of it or block it. The feeling of overcoming a wall you've been stuck on is fucking unprecedented in both games. The pride I felt when I took down my first monster ever, the Kurupeko, in Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate was amazing, and the genuine terror I felt when I saw a Rathian land right in front of me was unreal. The same can be said for Dark Souls. When I beat the penultimate boss of Dark Souls 3, I felt like screaming for joy, and that feeling just can't be beat. So, bottom line, are Dark Souls and Monster Hunter similar? Well, that's up to you. If you played for the exploration, or the story, they could not be further apart. But if you played for the challenge, then there are a lot of things that feel similar, even though the overall design isn't anywhere close to each other. And with that, I'll consider my mind purged. If you have something you'd like to add, feel free to leave a comment. This channel is something I do for fun, so there will likely be more analytic episodes like this, or whatever else I feel like. But, of course, the main show, Thoughtroversy, isn't going anywhere. Thank you very, very, very much for watching, guys, and you guys are awesome. Big thank you to Fox Burrito for the new background and logo for the episode. Go check her out, she's very talented. In the meantime, have an awesome day.